Continue.
Yeah. So casteism is like racism in the sense that there's a notion of racial purity, genetic racial purity, which gets diluted through mixing. That racist concept is an essential part of casteist mentality, and the eugenic mentality that marrying within the same family tends to preserve the caste. That's essentially caste because uh, within a marriages happen within a caste, they cannot happen between castes, and as castes are essentially conglomerations of clans, what we are seeing are really marriages within the family. In fact, there's a system called Gotra, which specifically traces your clan and genealogy, so that the knowledge of your Gotra also like regulates how marriages can take place. Yes. So coming to urban and rural areas, marriage is really where the true power of the caste system comes across. So even in urban areas, in very supposedly progressive families, when it comes to marrying outside your caste, there is it's very difficult. And in fact, a study about 3 months ago recently showed that 95% of all Indian marriages happen within the caste. 16, and it's almost 70 years after independence, and that really shows how strong the system is, where ultimately at the end of the day when you have to take the decision of marriage, 95% of marriages are within the caste. The caste system also, just another point, the caste system also makes hierarchical thinking a default for Hindus, because and actually for most Indians, because that culture is Hindus, because for them caste is a hierarchy, and if you're not from the same caste as them, you're either above them or below them. So it's a master or a slave relationship. So normative equality or values of equality come very difficult. It's very difficult for Hindus to meet somebody and just immediately think of them as an equal unless proved otherwise. It's always the other way around. It's always that you're either above or below me, and I need to figure out various appropriate hierarchical manner. But if I get to know that if you are from my caste, then we'll be on the same page. But even then, it's difficult, and some of the other excuses used to form a hierarchy. So Indian society, that's the reason why Indian society is extremely hierarchical when it comes to education, when it comes to workplaces. There is a lot of hierarchy in Indian society, and Indians are very uncomfortable with notions of equality actually. Now coming to how it works out in the rural areas, and that means 70% of India is very still in the grip of caste. So how does that play out? Well, first thing is geographically. So in most villages, residence is on the basis of caste. So the untouchables would tend to live outside the village because their presence is seen as polluting. Inside, there would be an area where only Brahmins will live. There will be an area where only the merchants will live. There will be an area where live, but there won't be an area where they all live together. So in most villages, that's the case. It's changing, but very slowly. The second thing is that caste also determines your access to resources. So untouchables, for example, cannot access ponds, wells. They cannot walk through the fields or the farms of upper castes. They cannot access grazing land or any kind of that same hierarchical operation. So everybody sort of looks down on the other. The priests look down on the warriors look down on the merchants look down on the lower caste, the lower caste look down on the untouchables. So that graded inequality takes place all the time, and there is heavy patriarchy because caste is also very patriarchal. There are very clear gender roles. In the Hindu law books, the Manusmriti says that untouchables and women should be beaten regularly like a drum to keep them in tune. So that's taken quite seriously in a lot of villages. And when women marry out, when they fall in love with somebody who's outside of their caste, or they marry or they run away with him, if the other person happens to be from a lower caste, then almost always the person is a case of kidnapping or something is put on him, or quite often the person is lynched to death along with their entire family. So across India, every day there are hundreds of incidents where caste-based violence takes place, with the main targets being the untouchables, but also to some extent the lower castes. And because the relationship between the lower caste and the untouchables is one of landowners, I guess, most of the violence is actually perpetrated by the lower castes, sadly. Um, yeah, then the traditional occupations are very strongly maintained in rural areas. So the teachers tend to be Brahmins, the local village trader tends to be a Vaishya, the farmers and the peasants and workers tend to be lower castes. So the caste system is pretty much intact actually, if you see in rural areas. Go to urban areas, it reduces a little bit, but not really. Now coming to how caste is being tackled, do I talk about that? How caste is challenged? So I like to talk about the main figure who really took the caste system head on. He is the father of the Indian Constitution. His name is Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He is on the history of Indian intellectuals. And his basic point was that the ultimate way to destroy caste is through intermarriage. That is his ultimate solution. But he said, this is the action which will destroy caste. The key question is, why doesn't this happen already? And he said that the reason why inter-caste marriage doesn't take place is because caste is... So he said that a Hindu, when he is following the caste system, is actually being a devout and a spiritual man. He's actually doing a good job. So what is required is to destroy the religious books themselves. And he wrote a very famous book called The Annihilation of Caste. It was written, I think, in 1936, and in Indian society, how it's greatly damaged Indian society. And in the end, he talks about a solution. So his solution is that two books, the Shastras, which are the law books, and the Vedas, which are the theological books, both books which contain the theory and the laws of caste, they should be discarded by Hindus. They should stop reading them. They should totally delegitimize them. But Dr. Ambedkar accepted that religion is something which is necessary. So he said that there should be one codified book for Hindus which contains progressive and modern values acceptable to modern life, which are kept in this one book, and the priests who will be in charge of this book will be regulated by the state, in the sense that anybody should be able to become a priest and they should be able to give an exam. So there will be state regulation of the Hindu religion. So that was his solution: destroy and delegitimize the Hindu religious texts. My final word, thanks for listening. Ultimately, the experience of oppression is common for everybody, no matter where you are. And there is no solidarity like solidarity in suffering. And it's the age of the internet, and this is really a time where progressive forces around the world can mobilize on certain global issues, like climate change, for example, or mass unemployment, or because these issues are so interconnected. And really the challenge is now what issues can be taken and raised at a global level, and how people can unite and push for these, especially people in developing countries who are suffering because of the exploitative world order, where a lot of resources are grabbed from them and sent to the developed countries. We need the help of progressive forces in the rich countries more than anybody else, because ultimately, if we in poor countries want to change the world order, we can only do it through our politicians or our diplomats. But our power is limited to some extent. But if progressive forces in the rich countries can put pressure on their own politicians, then that will then that can have like a direct impact actually. I'll just give one example. It's something which I work on. It's on taxation. The international tax system is built in such a way that money is taken from poor countries and given to rich countries. And poor countries have been mobilizing in a big way, civil society, politicians, diplomats, but it's been ineffective because the progressive forces in the rich countries have not given enough support and held their own politicians to account. because ultimately the tax revenue which is being taken and sent to the rich countries, that is being just used to further austerity politics. It's not really being used to benefit the masses in the rich countries. So I feel that there are these global issues like the way the international tax system is built, international trade. Here are issues where we really need sustained agendas and sustained campaigning and mobilization between and solidarity between people from rich and poor countries. So I feel that these issues are something where we should really build stronger solidarities on.
Thank you. Long live the revolution.
Long live the revolution.
Hindi?
Long live the revolution. Inqilab Zindabad. Do I begin? Okay. So British rule in India began in 1757 with the Battle of Plassey. Their first capital was Calcutta in West Bengal. They came as traders, and at that time the ruling power in India was the Mughal Empire, and they gradually received trading permits, and over time they became military power. They overthrew the Mughals and they finally captured power. Effectively they were a ruling power from 1757 onwards. Now, it was a typical colony. They made India into a source of raw materials, which were then shipped to England, which were processed and sent back to India. So that was the essential relationship. It was a colonial relationship. Now struggles against this began in various ways. The earliest struggles, the first struggle was in 1857. Indians call it the first War of Independence, and the British call it the Soldiers' Mutiny. So what happened was that in northern India, in this place called Meerut, Indian soldiers who were employed by the British Army for a variety of reasons, rebelled against the British Army, and they rebelled because essentially of the exploitation of the British Army. And they rebelled and they killed many of their British superiors, and the army then mutinied or rebelled, and it liberated many cities from British control. And after about 2 months, the British managed to rally their forces and they put the rebellion down. But after that, the British became very alarmed and they introduced representative democracy in India gradually. So the first main struggle was in 1857, an armed struggle by Indian soldiers who mutinied. Then a lot of struggles took place through the politics, through the legislature, and you had many reforms which were passed by law by the British because through the political struggle inside the legislatures. But so this phase where Indian leaders participated in the British political system and sought to bring about change through law is called the moderate phase of the Indian freedom struggle. This is the first phase. There was a lot of boycott of British goods and so on. The changes which were happening were too less, and the exploitation was too strong. So by about from 1906 to 1920, there was a phase of violence where Indians took up arms and they began gunning down Britishers, and this phase is called the revolutionary terrorist phase. So there were many armed uprisings against the British, especially by the tribals in areas where mineral-rich areas which had a big tribal population, which were very heavily exploited. There you had a lot of tribal uprisings. And the third phase is called the Gandhian phase. So after armed revolutionary violence, the British government was very alarmed and they made even more concessions. And at this stage, Mahatma Gandhi came back to India in 1916 from South Africa, and he united all the factions of the Indian freedom of the freedom fighters, and he led a series of mass movements where gradually the British ceded power to him. Now and finally India became independent in 1947. Now there are many criticisms of Gandhi. People say that he was a pacifist and in some ways was playing into the hands of the British strategy. And in fact, in the Second World War, a prominent Indian, Subhash Chandra Bose, took the help of the Germans and Japanese, raised an army and drove the British out from many places, and many Indians actually credit his militant aggression with being a key factor for actually India becoming independent rather than Gandhi's pacifist mass struggles.